You're gonna love this one. It's a Scream, baby. Hey guys, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. Yes, we are going to be talking about Scream today, if you got that reference from the opening there. Scream came out in 1996, was directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson, and it is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, so this was definitely something that I wanted to talk about this year for my Halloween horror month that I'm doing.
Everybody's a suspect! Go! Scared, are you?
So, for some reason, if you guys have never seen the movie Scream, little plot about the movie. Basically, it takes place in the town of Woodsboro, where a group of high school students are targeted by a serial killer who loves horror movies, and he goes by the name Ghostface. So the movie starts off, with a classic opening. You have Drew Barrymore, who everyone thought back in 1996 was going to be the star of this movie, or at least one of the stars, because, she was big at the time. She was right on the poster. A lot of the promotional material and stuff like that kind of focused on her. So, everyone was expecting her to, be one of the stars of the movie. So when it starts off and you see, you have Drew Barrymore, she's making some popcorn, getting ready to watch some scary movies when she ends up getting that first fateful call from Ghostface. And so a lot of people weren't expecting, her to get killed off right away. And it's funny because I was actually just rewatching this movie which I do every year, but I've seen it 100 times or something like that, crazy. But, rewatching it every year. And as soon as she started making popcorn, I was like, you know what? I got to go up and make some popcorn myself. Just to really get into the mood of things. But yeah, the scene, is classic. It opens up with her. She gets that call from Ghostface, and it's probably one of the scarier moments in the film, because overall, as a movie, I don't really think Scream, at least probably because when I saw it, I didn't get to see it till later, because at the time I would have been 6 years old, 7 years old, when this movie came out. So I didn't see it in theaters or anything like that. I didn't see it till a little bit when I was a little bit older. So I wasn't really scared of it, really too much. But that scene, if anything, just being alone and, thinking of the time of when this came out, getting a call like that, that would definitely kind of creep you out, especially where she's talking about, Ghostface mentions her boyfriend Steve. And every time I hear that line, his name wouldn't be Steve, would it? Just always gives me chills. Just such a great scene to start this movie off with. And then you guys know, she ends up getting killed. Spoilers, by the way, again, if you guys haven't seen that, which I imagine most of you have, but she ends up getting killed off, right away. I don't know if it's on YouTube. I still have never seen the extended cut of that. Which, if there's a link to that, definitely let me know down below in the comments. Because supposedly they did cut out a little bit. You get to see the boyfriend, his guts kind of spill out a little bit more. And then I think it focuses on her instead of zooming in so fast. It kind of stays on her a little bit longer. So I don't think I've ever actually seen that version. So if you guys have seen it, let me know down below in the comments. So after this opening, we end up getting introduced to Sidney Prescott, who is played by Neve Campbell. And, she's just this really badass character. She's dealing with this tragedy at the time. These events are going on. These two kids just got murdered, but a year ago, her mother was murdered in kind of a similar way. So she's, kind of dealing with that still. So it makes her, kind of a tragic character. But by the end of the film, she's a total badass. She doesn't just kind of run away from things. She kind of, takes stuff into her own hands, which is really cool. And I think makes her definitely one of the best final girls in the horror genre. And, she's been around. She's going to be back for the fifth movie that they're working on. So I would say, at least in my opinion, she's definitely up there for one of the top final girls of all time. So we get introduced to her. You also get introduced to Billy Loomis, who is played by Skeet Ulrich. And definitely, throughout the film, but especially in that opening sequence with them in the bedroom, I really got that Johnny Depp Nightmare on Elm Street vibe, and I'm sure that's totally, and like he probably has like said that, but I'm sure that's totally what Wes Craven was going for, with kind of a little bit of a throwback to his movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street. So yeah, you get introduced to those two characters, and then eventually we get introduced to the rest of the cast as well, at least like the main kids and stuff. You have Stu, who is played by Matthew Lillard, and he's kind of the goofy guy like the group. He's also like kind of best friends with Billy. And then you have Rose McGowan. She's playing Tatum, which is Sydney's like best friend. And then you also have Randy, who is played by Jamie Kennedy. And I would say he's definitely like my favorite character, like in the film, probably in the franchise as well, even though he was only around for like 2, well, technically 3, but I would say he's probably my favorite. I know he's a big fan favorite just because he's the horror guy, the horror nerd, loves everything, movies and stuff like that. So I just really connected with him in this movie, and part of it why I think makes it so enjoyable, because you're just like, yes, that is definitely me. So he plays Randy, and then you have Dewey, who is played by David Arquette. He is Tatum's older brother, and then he's one of the cops like in the town. And then last but not least, you have Gail Weathers, and she is played by Courtney Cox, and she is kind of this cutthroat reporter who's doing the reporting on like the murders that are going on in Woodsboro right now. So even though Randy's probably one of my favorite characters, I also really like Stu. He's just kind of like goofy like as well, and always really like Matthew Lillard as an actor. But I mean, just this whole cast is just, especially like the main like characters and everything. They just did a fantastic job, and it's funny because at the time, most of the people, besides like Courtney Cox, a lot of them were kind of like up and coming, or like kind of like unknowns, like they really hadn't like had those like big roles yet. So I think that like also added to it as well. Like sometimes when you're going into a film and not sure who someone is, they can always kind of surprise you with one of these kind of roles. So I think all the kids, they did a good job. You could see these guys being, like all friends like in high school and stuff like that. So the casting I thought was just fantastic, pretty much like top to bottom. And basically, after we get like introduced to the characters and stuff like that, the rest of the film is kind of like a, it's a horror film, but it's a, like murder, like mystery, like whodunit type of movie. Because, throughout the rest of the film, you have Ghostface going after these, these different characters. And then you have like our main cast of, kids, and they're trying to figure out like who did it. And the film definitely, it throws in like the red herrings and stuff like that. Going back to watch it the second time, third time, any time after really that first time, you can definitely like see those like hints, and you're like, okay, yeah, like it's kind of like obvious. But the first time, it's fun to kind of guess who it's going to be, and definitely wasn't expecting the 2 killers at the end of the movie. So and that's something that the Scream franchise, I think, for the most part, it always has. Even though some of the killers in future movies were maybe a little disappointing, it's always fun to kind of try and guess who you think Ghostface might be. Scream, the movie, it's just such a, like in my opinion, it's just such a well-written, directed film. You had Wes Craven, who he already had a Nightmare on Elm Street, and a bunch of other like horror films before Scream came out, and this was kind of him, doing another horror film, bringing the genre back. Because at the time, the early like 90s and stuff like that, a lot of the other horror franchises were kind of putting out, really mediocre to bad like sequels. So in Scream kind of, it came out at that time, and it revitalized the genre because it was just the way that it was shot. Wes did a great job with that, bringing these characters to life. But also Kevin Williamson, who was the writer, he's just always kind of had his finger on the pulse as far as like teenage dialogue and stuff like that. And, all these characters, the way they were written, the dialogue and things like that, just that combined with Wes Craven's directing really just made for, pretty close, if not, in my opinion, basically like a perfect movie. It's just so much fun. It was also very self-aware, which is something, that was different at the time. You didn't have a lot of movies kind of doing that. So, I loved myself that they acknowledged other horror movies, and they had like horror movie marathons and stuff like that. That was just so cool, especially, being like a big horror fan, when I did eventually see this, just being like, oh yeah, like I know this movie, I know that movie, and having characters like Randy and stuff like that just really made it so relatable. And even though it's not like super scary, it's just a really, really fun movie. You could imagine yourself hanging out with like these kids, or going to like one of these like movie marathon type of things, and that's just something that's always just really, really stood out for me. The movie itself, it has like a number of classic scenes. I mean, overall, like the movie, in my opinion, again, is definitely a classic for, one, for just like the film itself, but for what it did for the horror genre. But it has a number of, of really, really classic scenes. You had the opening with like Drew Barrymore. It's probably one of the most memorable horror scenes in, the last like 20, 30 years. And then, you also just have scenes like when we first kind of get all the kids together and they're talking outside of the school in front of like the water fountain thing or whatever, and just talking about like Casey and Steve's death and that banter back and forth. You have like Stu giving the classic line saying, "Live her alone." Just little things like that really make those scenes just like extra special and funny. One of my personal favorite scenes is when Stu and Randy and Billy at one point, when they're in the video store, and they're just talking about like who the killer can be, and talking about like different scary movies and stuff like that, and just being, I think, in the video rental store, because that's the time period that I grew up in, with Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, stuff like that. It's just always so nostalgic to watch that scene. It's one of my favorites, and also seeing Frankenstein, because I grew up on like the Universal black and white monster movies. So that was another one of my favorites.
Watch it, jerk. Oh! Dork. Jesus, this place is packed tonight, man. We had a run in the mass murder section.
And then obviously you also have the infamous the rules scene, where Randy goes through the rules of surviving a horror movie, and that's definitely, I would say that's definitely a classic scene that a lot of people, when you think of Scream, that's probably one of the first scenes that comes to mind, is him going through the, the different rules and stuff like that, and all the different tropes that, other horror movies have kind of fallen into, prior to that and even since that. So that's why, some of those scenes like that really make this film extra special.
What rules? You don't... Jesus Christ, you don't know the rules?
Have an aneurysm, why don't you?
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie.
So yeah, I mean, as I started this review off, that, Scream, it's definitely, not only is it one of my favorite horror movies, but it's just one of my favorite movies of all time in general. I remember the first time that I watched it, I actually had it's the DVD like box set with the 3 movies. I ended up like watching on DVD. Like I said, I didn't get to see this when it first came out because I was too young, but I remember watching it the first time, and like instantly that first time watching it was just like, yeah, I knew that, this was like a special film, and it's been something that I could go back and watch it. I usually do like at least like once, if not, a couple times like a year, and you just never get tired with it, because, the characters, memorable ones like, Randy, Stu, even Neve, but even like the other characters, like Tatum, Billy, Dewey, Gail, and stuff like that. Some of them are still around in the franchise, so they've been around for a while, but really just characters that, you don't always get those in horror movies. A lot of times, I've mentioned it in other reviews, but you get characters that are kind of just like throwaways, but these characters, you actually cared about them and wanted to see what happened to them as, like the franchise like goes on. So yeah, obviously, I really love this movie. As far as the score goes, it's a no-brainer for me. It's a 10 out of 10. I'm curious to see what you guys think of the original Scream. Leave your comments down below. Where does it rank as far as as far as the Scream franchise goes? And just just tell me what some of your memories are of the franchise. When was like the first time you saw it, and different things like that. I'm really curious to see. So let me know down below in the comments. And as always, guys, if you are new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button as well as the bell button next to it, just so that way you get notifications for all my new videos. And as always, guys, please make sure to check back for more Pop Culture with Pat.